If you were offered the opportunity to design a knife, if you were given a blank sheet of paper and someone said, make what you want, and one of the best bladesmiths in the UK, if not the world, will bring it to fruition for you, what would you do? Well, it might surprise you that initially I was quite hesitant. In fact, I was a little bit resistant to this. And one of the reasons why was that I'd been using knives for decades, and I had knives that I was very happy with. And so here was the opportunity to make something, but I was thinking, does the world really need another knife design? I mean, there are so many knife designs. I've got knives that I'm happy with, and I took some convincing, but I changed my mind. And what changed my mind was I went to visit Raven Armory and I met Simon Fairnham, and I saw the work that he and his colleagues made, and that was part of it. The work is just stupendous. They had spent a long time prior to this project kicking off in around 2010, 2011, making a lot of swords, and they were looking to make a working knife, and that's why they got in touch with me via someone who spent their time, make their living trading high-end knives. And so they put us together, and I went to Simon's workshop and the showroom, and I saw some of their work. I'd already looked at some of it on the website, but it was quite amazing. And so that was something I was like, okay, this could be something that is going to be really, really well done. So that was part of it. But equally, I was still thinking, does the world really need another knife design? Do we really just need another Woodlaw clone? You know, do we need to make another bushcraft knife? And my answer to that was no, we don't need another one of those. But Simon said something to me that changed my mind. And what that was, he was just like, make something that works for you. Rather than trying to design something for, you know, other people, make something that works for you, something that you would like, that you don't have in other knives that you've got, and then we'll see where that takes us. So that was actually the spark that started things off. And so I was then kind of freed from thinking about what this should be, what the marketplace for this was. You know, it could have just been a marketplace of one, and somewhat selfishly I thought, well, at least I'm going to get a knife out of it, you know, the prototype. So it's like, okay, well, let's do this. And I knew Simon was going to do a really good job of it, and I was just hoping that other people would like the knife too along the way. But what I really, really wanted this knife to be wasn't just some of the generic bushcraft knife. What I wanted was a really solid, absolute bomb-proof wilderness knife. Particularly, I was thinking about some of the wilderness trips that I make, and I wanted a knife that I could take into a wilderness and that be my only cutting tool potentially, and me not worry about it being damaged or degrading or breaking or anything else like that. So that was part of what we what I started with in my mind, and what the project started with. And then I also needed the knife to be super comfortable in the hand for extended periods of time. It needed to be good for batoning. It needed to be good for feather sticks in particular. It needed to be good for general carving. Needed to be good for game preparation, and it needed to be very resilient. And so those were the things that I wrote down. So, and then there were a few things that my kind of standard bushcraft knives didn't really do. You know, they're great, but they're all kind of on the light side, and sometimes you just want a little bit more chop, not to put too technical a phrase around it. And so I was like, I need something that's just a little bit heavier, that's got a little bit more chop to it, and that's partly about the weight, and it's also partly about the handle shape. And so that went into the handle shape as well. I wasn't trying to reinvent the wheel either. I didn't want to come up with some fantastical design that nobody'd ever come up with before, nor was I trying to copy other people. I was just trying to take design elements from knives that I'd used, that I liked, and also think about the knives that I had and what they did and didn't do. One of the things I really liked from my knife that I was using really a lot prior to this project, which was the Woodlaw Instructor's Knife, was the shape of the handle, and specifically the way that it swelled in my hand. Now, I've made videos about my two Woodlaw knives, the Alan Wood Woodlaw knives at least. I've got a Julius Peterson as well, and I also made a video about that. But the two Woodlaw knives made by Alan Wood, one is the Instructor's Knife, one is a standard Woodlaw. And you'll notice comparing those knives that the handle shapes are really quite different, even though the blades are ostensibly the same. And I preferred the instructor's handle, both the size of it, the swell of it, and the feel of the antler over the wood, to be honest with you. So I wanted to maintain as much of that feel as possible, and then also add some of the aspects to the handle. So I spent a lot of time on the handle. In fact, I probably spent more time on the handle than the blade initially, in terms of thinking about it. And then we also came up with this concept of the brass bolsters as well, to protect the front of the handle, especially as we were going to be potentially using this knife quite heavily with batoning and so on and so forth. So wanted to make sure, and Simon came up with this idea of the brass bolsters, and he thought he could do that technically. One thing that some people had mentioned to me about the sort of typical bushcraft knives, you know, your Woodlaws and your Woodlaw clones and similar knives, was that when they were using for game prep, particularly deer butchery, they felt that sometimes if their hands were a bit damp and they were skinning, that, you know, holding the knife quite lightly, that they felt like it might slip out their hands towards, and the blade run through their fingers. And so a slight more finger guard was also something that we considered. And then on the initial prototype, I also put in on the drawing for the initial prototype, I put in a recess for the finger to go in, so that you could hold it and that there was no way that would slip through. Now, in the end, that proved unnecessary, but it's there in the first prototype, and I'm kind of a little bit embarrassed showing the first the sketch, because it's not even a technical drawing, it's just a sketch of ideas. But within 3 days of Simon receiving that sketch, I had a model knife in my hands. It wasn't made of wood, it wasn't made of plastic, it was metal, it was made of EN45 spring steel, which is a sword steel, not ideal for bushcraft knives. It was just a mock-up, but Simon's mock-up was better than quite a few finished bushcraft knives that I'd had in terms of fit and finish. So this made me even more positive about the project at this point. So I'd got this knife, I tried it out. It had some elements that I wasn't quite happy with. The handle shape wasn't quite right. There was too sharp a change in angle between the top of the scales and the side of the scales. They weren't quite fat enough, and we didn't, in the end, the shape of the front of the handle meant that the choil was superfluous. And also I didn't feel like you could get powerful enough cuts, because that piece of blade that's closest to the handle wasn't there because of the finger recess. So on the second prototype, that was removed. We also wanted to change the angle of the blade to the handle, and we changed that by about 5 degrees, and that made a big difference to the way that it felt with cutting as well. And so I then got a second prototype, improved handle. This time it had brass bolsters, albeit they were like full thickness bolsters, and just a tiny little choil so that the full length of the blade could be sharpened, but no finger recess. And this was starting to feel like a proper tool. It already felt much better than the first prototype. And then as we moved to the third prototype, there were a few things that we needed to do. One was to chamfer the bolsters down. You've maybe seen my video on knife grips, and if not, I'll link to it. But one of the things you want to be able to do is bring your hand forwards on the knife, and chamfering the front of the handle, and in this case the bolsters, meant that we could do that. So that was something. And then what we also wanted was a third prototype in a steel that the knife was actually going to be made of, and in this instance it was 01 tool steel. So I got the third prototype, finalised shape, finalised handle shape, chamfered bolsters, 01 tool steel, and I started to use it, and it was amazing. Really fantastic for feather sticks, batoned like a dream, really good for game prep. Not fantastic for fine carving. That's one of the reasons why the PK2 exists, but that's a story for another day. But just super solid for all of the specifications that I'd given it. It was really, really good. And this is here. This is the third prototype, and I have kicked the living whatnot out of this knife. You can see that this has been on a journey or two. This was not a quick project. I got this third prototype. The first two were tested quite quickly. This one, then I said to Simon, this feels right. I am now going to use this for an extended period of time, and you know, any feedback obviously will come back to you. We didn't need to make any changes, to be honest. This knife has been well used. It hasn't been abused, but it's been used heavily. It's done winter trips in severe cold. It's done canoe trips. It's done lots and lots of trips. It's been used on many, many courses. And it's absolutely fantastic. I'll also link to an article that I wrote about this shortly after we developed the knife and went through these phases, and you can read more detail about the materials and the hardnesses and all of that stuff if you want to nerd out about that stuff. Just so you've got the general idea, it's 3/16 of an inch thick. It's about 5 millimeters on the back, and it's full thickness through the tang, and it's got these brass bolsters on it, so it's quite heavy. Also, like I say, you've got this lovely comfortable grip, and as I've certainly mentioned it before, and you may have heard me talk about before, I used to have a real problem with my hand here, especially when I first learned feather sticks, you know, in the sort of early 2000s when I was doing bushcraft courses and learning those techniques, and then starting to work as an assistant for Ray Mears. I'd broken this hand in martial arts a few years before in the late 90s, and I was still getting pain through that part of my hand when I was gripping tools. I wanted a knife that didn't give me that pain, that was very comfortable in the hand in that way, as well as very comfortable in the hand for extended use. You weren't going to get hot spots. A lot of knives are too square on the side, on the top here, and you get pain here. You get, so even if you're used to using tools, you get soreness there. I didn't want that, and I just wanted a really good grip. We talked about having this grip here so that if you're using it vertically, there's a bit of a finger guard there, not so much that it gets in the way when you want to choke the knife up, but there's a bit of a finger guard there, so if you're using the knife vertically, it doesn't slip out of your hand. And then this at the back gives you some strength in cutting, power in cutting, but also you can hold the knife further back. And this is something that I probably should demonstrate on a video properly one day. I've never really talked about this on a video before. This here, this hook, means that you can hold it further back, and you can actually chop little branches off and stuff more than you can with a standard bushcraft knife that is lighter than this. So this has got quite a lot of weight to it because of the thickness of the blade and the brass bolsters here. It's got quite a lot of weight. It's not unbalanced. It feels very balanced in the hand when you've got it there, but once you bring your hand to the back of the handle and you've got this hook to stop it slipping out your hand, you can really do some nice little chopping with that as well. And that's something I wanted with this particular design I didn't have with other knives. I'm not saying other knives should have it, it's just my other knives didn't have it. There's no point making a knife exactly the same as a knife you've already got, right? It's wasting your time. So I wanted this to do something a bit different. So that does that. So then this got tested. It also works really super well throwing sparks off because it's got quite a broad bevel, and that's partly a function of the fact that the back of the knife is quite fat. The angle that we wanted for making really good feather sticks and carving and stuff means that the bevel's quite broad, which means that this area here where the back meets the bevel is really quite nice and broad, and that's great for pushing big sparks off. So that was another thing that was a consideration and is definitely included in the finalized design. You can see the tiny little choil there, which means that you can sharpen the edge all the way from one end to the other. You don't have a section towards the end here that you can't sharpen. So those are all those design features. Now this isn't the finalized Loveless bolt pins that Simon puts in now, but these are slightly thinner brass than the finalized version. And I also found with the sheath that it was a little bit too thin, and sometimes when the knife went in slightly askew, it sliced the inside of the sheath, and ultimately it came through the sheath. So we made some adjustments to the sheath. Basically a thicker welt obviated that problem. The leather work actually that comes out of Raven Armory as well is absolutely fantastic. So this is the knife that I use now, that I carry now. This is my wilderness trip knife. This is my knife that I depend on particularly on the wilderness canoe trips that I do. Now the third prototype and the knife I used for a long time was 01 tool steel, and Simon also was offering RWL 34, which is a stainless steel, and this is a production model. It's just one of the standard production models, and it's also been very well used, and this is a lovely knife. It's a working knife. I know some people don't like to use them. but it's got the Raven Armory mark on one side, it's got the Frontier Bushcraft mark on the other, and it's got my signature. That's all laser etched on. So, and I'm not trying to sell these knives. I have, you know, I don't make these knives, I don't sell these knives. Full disclosure, I get 5% royalty on these, theoretically, which is like an Amazon commission basically on these knives from Simon, and that really normally comes in the form of I get a knife every now and again. So theoretically I should get one knife every 20. I'm not sure I've had that over the years in terms of production knives, but I have had multiple pre-production models. I've had prototypes, and I've got this one here. I've also had an instructor's knife that I've given to one of my instructors as well when he qualified. So there's very little skin in the game for me in terms of money. I just, as I say, I started off wanting a knife that would do certain things that I didn't have a knife to do. A couple of considerations on the shape of the blade as well. It's not really any longer than the length of your standard Woodlaw, Mora, etc., but it is fatter. That's partly a function of the shape that I wanted for the edge, so that we could get really nice powerful cuts, really gradual slide off the end, so to speak, so you don't get the sudden change in pressure. The angle of the blade relative to the handle works really well in maintaining the cut as you cut through the material. You don't find that you drop off in engagement with the wood as you're slicing through it. That then shapes this side of the edge side of the blade. And then in terms of the back of the blade, what I wanted was something that wasn't too fragile a point, but could be used particularly for skinning, where you bring it in slightly off the point, so the point's not going to cut into the flesh, so you can get under the skin and then just run that up as you run up, say like a deer's leg or what have you. And one of the things I didn't mention earlier as well is Simon and I decided, and particularly Simon suggested it, that we shot blast the sides. Then you've got a bit more grip on the blade as well. So you've got this quite broad blade. We've got the chamfered bolsters, so that you can bring your hand forwards, and then you've got the shot blasted blade, so you've got a really good grip on the side of the blade, even if your hands are a little bit damp or the blade's a little bit damp. And then you can get that blade reversed and you can run it up the inside of the skin if you're doing some game preparation or what have you as well. So there's lots of features in this that aren't necessarily immediately apparent, but lend themselves to a really sturdy knife. As I say, I've spent a lot of time on the handle, but the blade's also been thought about considerably as well. Still makes really good sparks with a ferro rod. Still makes really good feather sticks. It's probably the best feather sticking knife that I own. Really good spark, so you can do your feather sticks, make your fine curls, drop a massive spark in, light your feather sticks with a knife, and that's the sort of thing I want to be able to do on a wilderness trip. I want to be able to scrape birch bark up really quickly. I want to drop a big spark on it. I want to get it going, get my thin sticks on. I want a fire going at the end of the day. Also, with this being stainless steel, I don't worry about getting it wet. I don't worry about falling out of my canoe when I'm using a leather sheath. I still like the leather sheath. And so this is really impervious. It's my Carter handle. It's got the proper blind loveless bolts in there. Again, 3/16 of an inch thick, 5mm, Armory Rail 34. Absolutely fantastic knife, bomb proof. Is it for everyone? Absolutely not, but people have been asking me, a few of you in particular have been pestering me almost to make a video about this knife, and this is the first time in 14 years I've made a video about this knife. So I'm not a knife obsessive. I view knives as tools, but I hope you find that interesting. There's a link to an article below where I go through all the details of the materials that were used for all the different prototypes, etc., and that was written back in 2011, I think. So it's been a long time coming to make this video, but I hope it shows the length of time that I take to test things out, to bring things to fruition. Also, it's just absolutely fantastic to be working with a maker like Simon. His attention to detail, the standard of his workmanship, both his and his colleagues is second to none in my experience. And as I say, I'm not trying to sell you these knives. You probably can't even get one at the moment, but people have been asking me to talk about these, and they are very, very good tools. Also, if you'd like to learn more from me, go to my website, paulkirtley.co.uk/emails, and I will send you a curated list of the best of material from my site, my podcasts, my Ask Paul Kirtleys, my YouTube from the past 15 years that will come to you in a logical order that allows you to build your skills, your knowledge, your perspectives, interviews with other experts, just a really nice sequence of material. So if you really want to dive deep on some of the materials that are kind of buried in the vault, so to speak, like the article about this knife might have been, then you can go there and get that. And also, if you want to learn about the first bushcraft knife I ever had, then watch this video here now.